longer will it be till we cross that Mason-Dixon line? At daylight, would you tell that engineer to slow it down? Or better still, just stop the train, 'cause I wanna look around. Hey porter, what time did you say? How much longer will it be?
The original members of the La Mesa Club were very much interested in building a model of this line. Their first layout in the city of La Mesa was based loosely upon the Tehachapi Mountains. All of the major locations on the line are included in this model.
Working with the scale gives you the accurate proportion, so you can duplicate what you see in the real world. If you're trying to do scenery, you have to understand the geological forces that are at work in the area that you're modeling, because if you don't do it right, it won't be convincing. You have to understand the history of the railroads so that you're not mixing a 1990s freight car with a 1920 locomotive. If you do that, you lose all credibility, because you're not maintaining the scale, if you will.
The scenery is based largely upon a whole album of photographs that were taken. Various members of the club actually made numerous trips up to the Tehachapi Mountains with their cameras and have actually photographed most of the actual trackage between Bakersfield and Mojave. The most important thing that I've done is to do scenery work. The green that you see here is basically sawdust that's been dyed and glued on. The trees, a lot of them have been made from various twigs of plants. A lot of it, the model railroaders have just used their imagination to put together things.
It's the whole story of how the West was settled. Trains played a bigger part in that than most people realize.
The depot was built in 1915, or it opened in 1915 for the California Exposition. The California Exposition was actually responsible for most of the buildings that are here in Balboa Park. And it was quite the affair that was being held here in San Diego at the time.
The Harvey Girls were a railroading and American tradition. A lot of the things that I have read say that the Harvey Girls, more than anything else, civilized the American West, because the young ladies, if I remember the quote, had to be of good moral character. Fred Harvey was something of a Renaissance man. He and the president of the Santa Fe Railroad operated together for 40 some odd years on nothing more than a handshake. Harvey brought a lot of civilization to the West.
I was very young when I started in this hobby. My parents bought me a train, a used Lionel train. Many of us got started in the hobby with either Lionel trains or American Flyer trains.
I became involved in model railroading because my father was somewhat interested, and that was about 1948, 1950, and I've been a train nut ever since.
I had trains as a little boy, and as I grew up, you know, got interested in girls and career and other things, and got away from it. And 12 or 15 years ago, I, on a whim, went to a train show, wound up building a couple of modules myself, and 9 or 10 years ago, I was one of the people that helped start this particular club.
My father bought me a Lionel train when I was 6 years old. And then when I got into high school, I had a buddy who took me around to various spots in Southern California, and we watched the trains.
I still have the first car that my father and I ever built together when I was 8 years old. It's rather ugly, and it's not up to the standards of this club, but it's one of my prized possessions.
When we formed this club, we started out with one basic rule, and that rule was have fun. Rule 2 is follow Rule 1. And then we questioned why we would need any others.
Have a ball with it. Above everything else, we're still little boys playing with toy trains. And if we ever lose sight of that fact, then the hobby loses a lot of its fun and a lot of its appeal, at least to me.
You know, it can be just a case of you enjoy running trains, or it can be a case of wanting to get into the history or the mechanics of it.
The philosophy here at the museum is to, at least within this club, is to model as exactly as possible within the constraints we have to live within.
My favorite part of the whole gallery is that would be the people that we meet in here. And they all have stories to tell about relatives who worked on the trains. We have children who visit here every week, sometimes every weekend, with a parent or a grandparent. So they're knowledgeable about trains in general. And some eventually grow up to become a part of this group and actually run trains. And we see many children from the time when they can hardly see the train on the layout to when they're in high school. And we grow up with them.
Those little people at the class will drive the car. I like the bridge, the black bridge, the side. I like when you guys are coming to school and the train goes over.
So it's the people that we work with, seeing the youngsters come into the hobby and learn appreciation for it, watching the kids at the rail around here's eyes light up when a train comes by. Just the friendship involved in the hobby. But it's the people that I've worked with and been around that make it the hobby that it is.
This is your horn. This is the bell.
I come down here and I'll do everything but go woo woo ding ding.